For decades, one name has been tangled up with the breakup of the world's most iconic band, Yoko Ono. And for just as long, whispers have trailed Paul McCartney, suggesting the wounds from those chaotic years never quite healed. Now, at 82, has Paul McCartney finally opened up about why a shadow of unforgiveness might still hang in the air? They say time heals all wounds, but some scars, it seems, run deeper than music history. What really went down? What were the moments, the words, the sheer tensions that dug so deep for Paul McCartney that forgiveness, for so long, felt out of reach? Picture this: the Beatles, a super tight-knit group, a band that had taken over the world, working in their own special bubble. Their creative hub, the studio, was practically sacred ground. Then, Yoko Ono walked into John Lennon's life, and almost overnight, she was in that sacred space too. This was a big deal. Before Yoko, partners just didn't sit in on recording sessions. Paul McCartney himself said her constant presence was something the band had to deal with. It wasn't just that she was there, it was how the whole dynamic shifted, the unspoken rules bending right in front of them. Paul, on a 2023 podcast, remembered Yoko being literally in the middle of the recording session. While he admitted that if John wanted her there, then it should happen, he also confessed, anything that disturbs us is disturbing. The Beatles' well-oiled machine started to clank and sputter, a new, unpredictable element thrown into their complicated world. For Paul especially, this wasn't just a small bother, it felt like a fundamental shift in how they worked, a crack in the very foundation of their musical brotherhood. The awkwardness wasn't just about having a partner in the room, it ballooned into what Paul McCartney reportedly called workplace interference. Tensions, already simmering as the Beatles juggled global fame and their own evolving sounds, started to truly boil over. McCartney has talked about specific things that really got to him, times when Yoko's influence on John seemed to directly chip away at Paul's own contributions and his place in the band. There were supposedly comments, passed on through John, that Paul never did anything for the Beatles, that his main job was just booking the studio. Imagine hearing that when you've co-written some of the most famous songs ever and been a key creative force. Whether those remarks were twisted in translation or not, they cut deep. Paul felt angry and confused, wondering if it was jealousy or just plain irritation. He recalled Yoko voicing opinions on musical arrangements or how things should sound, sometimes without even checking with the rest of the band. This wasn't just about creative tiffs anymore, it was about feeling his lifelong partnership with John, the absolute core of the Beatles, being invaded, and his work seemingly devalued as it was happening. It felt, as he put it once, like a new band was forming within our band. For half a century, one story has echoed through music history: Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles. It's a simple, dramatic answer for a messy situation, and Yoko became an easy target for millions of heartbroken fans. But what has Paul McCartney actually said about it? Surprisingly, for anyone who believes in a never-ending feud, Paul has been pretty clear for years that Yoko was not the only reason the Beatles split. Back in a 2013 interview, he put it plainly: she certainly didn't break up the group. The group was already breaking up. Plenty of research and Paul's own statements back this up. The Beatles were already dealing with serious cracks. They were heading in different artistic directions, they had business squabbles, especially over manager Alan Klein, and John Lennon had actually told the band he was leaving before the official split. Paul admitted Yoko's influence on John was huge, that John was besotted with her, but he insisted that wasn't the root of the breakup. So, if Paul doesn't blame Yoko for the split, then what are the real reasons for this long-held idea that he never forgave her? The answer isn't so much about the breakup itself, but more about the personal pain and a sense of broken trust during those tense final years. At the absolute center of the tension between Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono was, of course, John Lennon. John and Paul weren't just bandmates, they were like creative twins, childhood friends whose songwriting partnership defined a generation. Yoko's arrival didn't just shake up the band, it fundamentally changed Paul's relationship with John. McCartney has hinted that he felt he was no longer the person John fully trusted. That feeling of being displaced, of losing his main creative partner and best mate to this new, all-consuming presence, was a massive blow. Some stories suggest Paul felt Yoko was speaking for John, or maybe twisting what John really felt, which just made the gap wider. Yoko Ono herself once said that Paul's efforts to lead on projects like Let It Be were about him wanting to control the group, which really shows you how different their perspectives were. The rivalry wasn't just for John's musical ear, but it seemed, for his loyalty. This undercurrent of personal loss and what felt like betrayal by his closest friend, with Yoko as the trigger, if not the sole cause, became a huge part of Paul's lasting discomfort. It wasn't just about the music, it got incredibly personal. So, let's get to the heart of this confession the title talks about. If it wasn't just about the breakup, why did Paul McCartney hold on to such strong, negative feelings about Yoko Ono for so long? The reasons are complex, all stemming from that intense, chaotic period. First, it was the feeling that their tried-and-true creative process was disrupted, an unwelcome intrusion into a space Paul viewed as almost holy. Second, it was the personal sting from comments apparently made by Yoko that seemed to brush off his huge contributions to the Beatles. And third, it was the undeniable change in his friendship with John, feeling his closest collaborator drift away under Yoko's strong influence. Just imagine, you're co-leading the biggest band on the planet, and suddenly you feel like your ideas are being questioned, your history doubted, and your bond with your main partner is strained by a new, constant presence. McCartney has said this time was incredibly tough, a period when the fun of making music was buried under tension and misunderstandings. The feelings weren't just professional, they were deeply emotional. The unforgiveness, if you want to call it that, wasn't really about one single blow-up, but more the built-up weight of all these little digs, these shifts, these perceived attacks on his role, his music, and his friendship. It was the sense that things were changing for good, and not in a good way, with Yoko right at the center of it all. This whole story is way more complicated than a lot of people think. If you're finding this dive into Beatles history as fascinating as we do us a favor, hit that like button, subscribe for more music deep dives, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss what's next. John Lennon's tragic death in 1980 was a bombshell that changed everything. When faced with such a huge loss, old fights can often seem petty, or at least, get looked at in a new light. For Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono, their shared grief over John became a kind of reluctant, unspoken connection. While their relationship didn't magically turn into a warm friendship overnight, there was a clear shift from the open tension of the Beatles' last years. Publicly, they started to figure out how to handle their shared legacy with John. Paul has said that if John loved Yoko, there had to be something special about her, because John was not stupid. That was a big turning point, a willingness to try and see Yoko through John's eyes, at least a bit. George Harrison, too, apparently advised Paul not to hang on to such negative feelings, nudging him towards making peace. There were even some quiet collaborations, like working together to release the Beatles' track Now and Then in 2023, hinting that a functional, if not super close, working relationship had formed over the years. The ice, it seemed, was slowly, carefully, starting to melt. This is where that provocative never forgave title bumps up against a much more complicated truth. While the hurt and frustration Paul went through were definitely real and deep, his own words over the years tell a story not of endless unforgiveness towards Yoko, but of gradually making peace with the past. In many interviews, McCartney has flat out said he's moved past the feud with Yoko Ono. He once famously asked, "Are you going to hold a grudge you never really had?" This suggests that maybe the public idea of their feud was more intense than his own long-term feelings. He made his stance on forgiveness very clear, stating that the only person involved in this whole saga he cannot forgive is Mark David Chapman, John Lennon's murderer. That's a massive distinction. His deep anger and inability to forgive are aimed at the man who took John's life, not the woman John chose to share his with. Statements from Paul, even those reportedly from around early 2025, seem to keep reinforcing this. He's said things like, "I don't blame her anymore. She had a role in John's life, I had a different one," and added, "We're not close friends, but we're not at odds anymore. I think both Yoko and I understand some things can't be undone, but they can be respected." That doesn't sound like someone who never forgave. It sounds like someone who's wrestled with some heavy stuff and found some sort of peace. Over the years, Paul McCartney's public comments have also revealed a growing appreciation for Yoko Ono's influence on John Lennon, especially regarding his life and work after the Beatles. He's recognized that Yoko opened John up to new artistic ideas and a different way of looking at the world, which played a part in his iconic solo career and his passionate activism. Paul has even called her "badass." This isn't just him being polite, it's one artist acknowledging the complex things that inspire another. McCartney has actively tried to fix the overly simple story that painted Yoko as the only bad guy in the Beatles' breakup, stressing that the band was already coming apart for many reasons. This effort to show a more balanced view is a big step away from the raw frustration of the late 1960s. He seems to get that Yoko, while she definitely shook up the band's dynamic, was also a crucial figure in John's personal and artistic life. This mature viewpoint shows a man who has come to terms with a tricky past and gained a fuller understanding of everyone involved, Yoko Ono included. So, did Paul McCartney, at 82, really, finally confess why he never forgave Yoko Ono? The truth, as it usually is a lot more tangled than a catchy headline. The deep frustrations Paul felt were absolutely real: the studio intrusions, the hurtful remarks, the painful shift in his bond with John. Those were the reasons for a time of intense bitterness and misunderstanding. However, McCartney's own words, spoken over many years and particularly in more recent times, show a clear change of heart. He has explicitly said he doesn't blame Yoko for the breakup, that he's let go of old grudges, and that his only true unforgiveness is aimed at John's killer. It's been a long road from the raw wounds of the late 60s to the more thoughtful understanding he has today. Paul McCartney's story with Yoko Ono isn't about a simple, never-ending grudge match. It's a rich, complex picture of early conflict, personal pain, shared grief, and eventually, a form of reconciliation, even if not a complete one. The confession, then, isn't about a lasting inability to forgive. It's an insight into why those early days were so incredibly hard for him, and how those deep feelings became a major part of music history. The Beatles' legacy is partly defined by these human complexities, and Paul's journey with Yoko Ono is proof of the enduring power of time, perspective, and the complicated ties of a shared past. What are your thoughts on the whole Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono saga? Drop them in the comments below, we'd love to hear them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next trip into music history. Thanks for watching.